Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, find out what happens when a city's entire infrastructure depends on a single building and then that building explodes. Plus the awesome security upgrades coming to Android and the in-app purchase bypass Russian hackers figured out for Apple, plus some great audience questions. All that and more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 67 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on July 19th, 2012. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the incredible ScaleEngine.com. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Welcome to episode 67, dude.
Yes.
67 straight in a row. Look at the TechSNAP uptime. Like a good free BSD box, right, Alan?
Yeah. 67 weeks.
The little behind-the-scenes joke is earlier in the chat room, like really kind of a couple hours before the show was even really going to get started, Alan was in the chat room talking to somebody about how he was upgrading a free BSD box in place, and so it had uptime that was like just unbelievably long.
Well, you know, the machine has to reboot every once in a while for the updates or whatever, but basically exactly the same hardware. No single component has even failed, so it's part of it is just luck with the hardware.
Yeah.
But the same machine from the same original install in 2007.
Wow.
In 2007, I ordered the machine and they installed FreeBSD 6.0 on it. And I've never reformatted. I've just in-place upgrade from 6.0 to like 6.2, 6.4, 7.1, 7.3,
so you never
8,
physically
2,
powered
8,
off
4.
though?
I've had to reboot it a few times.
But you've never had like the power off,
no.
like it just sitting there.
Never.
Wow, there you go. That's kind of like the show. It's a metaphor for the show. And you know, actually, this is a good segue too. If you've been watching for a while now, we're getting close to episode 70, and maybe some of the subjects we've covered have been valuable for you. Something you might consider is checking out the new donation option we have over at JupiterBroadcasting.com, Amazon Payments. Right now, it's kind of limited on what we can do. But on the main page, we have a $7 a month subscription, and on JupiterBroadcasting.com/donate, the donate page, we also have a $10 a month subscription option. You can also still use PayPal if you've considered doing that. Now, there are a couple of gotchas. Like right now, I don't think there's I don't know how to hook it up to the recognition wall. So right now, I believe PayPal is the only thing that writes to the recognition wall. Maybe we can figure that out. I don't know. Alan's the one that hooked up the recognition wall, so he might know better than I. But
yeah, that's just using a PayPal IPN. I don't know if.
I don't know if Amazon might not support it.
Well, they would have their own system of some kind, I imagine, but it would just be a matter of hooking it all up.
They do let me redirect people to a site, and people maybe could submit something at that site. That might be something I'll look at doing. That's maybe what I'll do. And then I've also had some requests for Google Checkout as of recently, so I might add those too. But so anyways, thank you for supporting Jupiter Broadcasting that way. Having the monthly subscription is nice because then we can actually do a little accounting and forecast revenue and expenses and things like that. Also, something you might consider is just our affiliate links down at the bottom of the website. Well, not that page. That's way down there. Scroll all the way down to the very bottom of the website, and we have links down there for Amazon US, UK, Newegg, ThinkGeek, Best Buy, Mint.com, Audible.com, the new Code School, which is a great way to learn how to develop online, and Gamefly, and also our Chrome extension. Just a note about those browser extensions. From time to time, your browser update disables extensions, like the new Firefox update, or even now Chrome. Chrome's doing it too, so every now and then you have to go in there and check to see if our extension is still active, because I'm betting it's not, based on the fact that was how our revenue is this month on affiliates. It's like nothing compared to last month, but it's okay, you guys. Just check your browser extensions for me. All right, Alan. What do you say we jump into our first story? This sounds pretty wild.
Just a note, I did the math. 67 episodes would be 469 days of uptime.
469 days of uptime?
Yep.
We should calculate
67 episodes times 7.
We should calculate the hour and then apply our hourly rate plus tack on a couple extra hours for research and then a few extra hours for post-production, and then just figure out what that dollar amount would be, because that would be the interesting dollar amount. I think
we did that the other week.
Yeah, for one episode we did it, yeah.
Oh,
but
okay.
I'm saying for all of them, for all 67. That could be an impressive figure. All right. So that sounds like there was like a series of events that started kind of innocuously that led to a pretty significant outage in Calgary, right?
Yeah. Basically, there was an explosion at the Shaw building, which is Shaw is a major ISP in Canada.
Yeah.
And their headquarters building houses a bunch of data centers.
Okay.
And on the 13th floor, an electrical transformer exploded and caused a fire. The fire was fairly small and was put out rather quickly, although basically it required shutting down the data center. There's a backup system and a backup data center, although that backup data center is in the same building on a different floor. And the sprinkler systems caused that to be shut down as well. And most of their backup generators couldn't be turned on because they got, sprayed by the sprinkler systems, or some components of the electrical system got wet, and so they couldn't power anything up.
Wow.
Yeah. So a number of important services were knocked offline. 911 service for about 30,000 people who use Shaw for their landline. So those people couldn't call 911, and they were being told to use their cell phones instead.
Yikes.
Repack, which is the system that the city uses to route ambulances to the hospitals, because you don't want everybody going to the same hospital at once because they won't be able to handle the load and so on. But that system was down, so ambulances had to just go to the nearest hospital, and that caused certain hospitals to get a lot more patients than other ones.
Yeah, you think? Oh, boy.
IBM operates a data center in the Shaw building, and that was offline. The City of Calgary's 311 system, they used that to provide a huge set of government services and information. It's all... So basically, if you want to talk to anything for the government, you just dial 311 and they kind of direct you from there. That was completely offline. But they set up a regular telephone number you could call to get access to some of that information because, they provide access to pretty much everything with that.
Yeah.
The transit systems phone was completely down. So they have backup for some of the stuff, but not everything because it's too expensive. So, checking if trains and buses were running on time wasn't available. There are 3 radio stations in the Shaw building that went offline. Q107, QR77, and Country 105 were off. The Calgary Parking Authority and the Calgary Fire Department experienced problems, as well as a few different local banks had their problems with their online banking systems because they were running out of that data center.
Jeez.
Parts of the computer systems for the Alberta Justice and Alberta Health Services were also taken offline. And... a huge number of government websites, and the Alberta Health Services had to postpone non-critical surgeries scheduled for the couple days after because the electronic health records were down. So they couldn't get access to patients' informations ahead of the surgeries. So they were only doing critical surgeries where they would use the paper records.
So as kind of Dream points out in the IRC chat room, he's like, well, haven't they ever heard of not putting all your eggs in one basket? Is this a
Well,
is this
they
a
had
case?
a backup center, but it was in the same building on a different floor.
And so, okay, I was going to ask if maybe it was more like a data line issue too, and it didn't matter if they had, services somewhere else.
Basically, yes, there's this building was a hub for everything because it was headquarters, and it really shouldn't have been. We'll get to more of the details on the failure of the backup system and the other stuff in a minute here. Also, Calgary Lab Services, which provides medical testing and so on, had delays because they weren't able to match up test results with patients because of no electronic health records. Privacy reasons, they don't, write patients' names on test results. It's all done with IDs and so on, so that they can just match it up at the end.
Yeah.
So the people doing the testing don't know whose, medical test they're performing. So that, somebody famous doesn't have their information leaked or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
But because of no electronic health records, they couldn't match up patients to the test results. So when they had some results that were critical, they had to try to match them up to, it's like, all right, so we have these 3 results for this one doctor, and he'll have to figure out which patient's which.
Wow.
And stuff like that. A lot of registry services were offline. You couldn't renew your driver's license or your vehicle registration. Land title searches and registrations were unavailable. High school transcripts were unavailable. And couldn't be processed, which was an issue because the deadline for people that had conditional acceptance to college and university, the deadline was today for them to get your high school transcript. Now, that got back online in time, and I think the universities might have extended the deadline a little bit.
I hope so.
To make sure that people could still get in. But it was, I'm sure that caused some stress to some high school students that were trying to get into college.
Just imagine. Wow.
So Peter Boissonnet, who is the president of Shaw Communications, says it is not yet clear why the backup system failed to take over. He said that the activation of the sprinkler system might have played a role, and they had to be very careful bringing services back online.
Right.
Because,
fry them. If they're wet, you don't.
Yeah, well, if the power systems are wet and you turn them on, you can cause arcing and more explosions and fires and all kinds of stuff. IBM Canada, which is the province's IT contractor, uses the Shaw building for their data center, and it remained blackout for more than a day. So they had hoped to bring it back up in the local data center quickly, but because power couldn't be restored quickly enough, what they had to do was fly analog backup tapes from Alberta out to the backup site in Ontario, which is where I live. That's about a 4-hour flight.
The ultimate snail mail.
Yeah, and then carefully load them back onto new servers. There were a few systems that had mirrored backups that they could get back online within 48 hours, but the vehicle registry and stuff like that were still just on analog tapes, which had to be loaded. And, tapes don't read that fast.
No, that's,
so it was going to take at least 72 hours to restore the data to servers in Ontario. Plus, they had to get the data there first.
Imagine
provision the servers and get it up. And
how hectic that must have been. There's going to be a lot of war stories coming out of this.
Yeah. And the government, like I said, the government hoped to restore data to the local data center by getting it back up quickly instead of having to, spend 3 days moving the data to Ontario.
Sure.
But because the power couldn't be restored quickly enough due to the water damage and so forth, they shifted to the backup site in Ontario, and the services are going to continue running there for a while. And they'll be shifted back to Calgary some point later in the year.
Now, did you say or did you mention what the cause of the explosion was? Was it a gas line or something?
No, it was just they don't really know. They just know it was the electrical transformer in the electrical room.
It blew itself. Oh, okay. Yeah. The transformer itself blew. It wasn't something near it. Gotcha. Wow, Alan,
but basically, they're going to keep running all the servers out of Ontario because they don't want downtime to move it back to Calgary, and they're going to shift it probably over a weekend or something. Not anytime very soon.
If folks want to see the chaos for themselves, Alan linked from day 2 to between day 2 and day 7 of coverage that they did up there, and there's video clips, and people are just out of their head. It's great. It's great.
There are people trying to renew their health cards and their driver's licenses, and the one guy's like, today's the only day I have off to come into a government office to renew my driver's license, and they're closed because their computer system is down.
Yeah, and that's what happens when sometimes the clouds pour rain, Alan. Sometimes storm clouds, folks. What can you do? Because
the major data center that hosted most of this stuff was IBM, I'm hoping that maybe our friend, the other Alan, can get us some
story background detail.
Their internal after-action report on why the backup system didn't kick in and so on.
Oh, I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of lovely meetings and some post-mortems going on.
And the other one is the Privacy Commissioner for Alberta is investigating if people's medical data isn't being backed up properly if they couldn't restore it quickly enough. Why is there not a hot spare for critical information like this?
I just write back and I'm like, oh yeah, well sorry, our encryption was just too awesome. It just takes a while. Well, interesting, Alan. Any other thoughts on that one?
No.
All right. Well, I'm really glad you tagged this next story to talk about because I actually had somebody ask me about this. And so now I'll be able to say, go check out TechSNAP episode 67. So this is a new feature that's being introduced with Android Jelly Bean. And it's designed to make Android Jelly Bean harder to exploit. And it's so memory space randomization is something that we've had in a lot of desktop operating systems for a little while now. And
since the Android was running Linux, it basically could have had the option to do it. And so in Android 4.0, they introduced address space layout randomization, which did basically Ars Technica has a nice diagram of kind of what it looks like.
Yeah.
But basically the idea is that you store the different parts, like the code for the program, the data, and the stack and the heap and all this stuff in different places that are randomized so that if one of them overflows, the exploit doesn't know where that's happening. So basically how you normally exploit a buffer overflow is, there's the data where, the program is receiving the information you send it. And if you can basically make it receive more information than it has allocated memory, that'll start overwriting a different part of memory. And once you overwrite into the part where the code of the program is, that means that you can cause the program to skip to a different place in memory and run some data you've injected.
Yeah, which could be something
remote code execution. Basically, send it some code and keep overflowing it until it loops back and runs the code you injected. By randomizing where the different parts are stored, that basically makes it really hard to do that because you don't know where the data is compared to where the code is. But they introduced that in Android 4.0, but they were only randomizing some of the addresses, not all.
Okay.
And they had one of the settings, the Linux kernel settings, was set to 1 instead of 2, so it wasn't as strong as it could have been.
Okay.
In Android 4.1, they added position-independent executable support, which means that the program doesn't have to be in a fixed location to run. And they added the heap randomization and linker randomization, so the different parts of the program can be all randomized now.
And also, according to the Ars Technica article, iOS has this as well, has for 16 months. And Lion, OS 10 Lion has it. And
they
I believe
tried to do it in earlier OS 10, and they screwed it all up, and it was really not working.
And didn't they introduce it with Windows, like XP, like with one of the service packs? Yeah.
I think XP has had DEP and ASLR for quite a while.
And so it's been in Windows, since then.
And we talked about it's actually the next story in the news, but we talked about Microsoft EMET, the enhanced mitigation toolkit, and how it basically forces ASLR onto every program instead of only ones that support it, and how that was crashing ATI drivers or AMD drivers for video cards. That's the next news story, but we'll get to that.
Okay. Do you want to do that now?
Talked about it, no, but we've talked about it before. Okay. Anyway, so by adding ASLR and PIE and combining with the existing DEP or data execution prevention, what that does means that the data areas of the program are marked specifically so that code in there can never be executed. The idea behind that is if somebody does fill the program's buffer with code, it can't ever be run because it's specifically marked as this isn't the program, this is data, this should never be run.
These are not allowed to be executed.
Right. And that uses the hardware-based NX bit or no execution bit, saying, all this range of memory is not allowed to be executed.
So these ARM CPUs must have that just like our x86 chips have them.
Yeah. But basically, with all these things put together, it makes it very impractical to exploit a buffer or stack overflow and a bunch of memory corruption attacks.
So it was the Duo Security blog that posted about this originally.
Yeah, he has all the actual research and is linked from the ARS Technica thing, and I linked it directly in the show notes. Although there are some concerns about how random the ASLR is when it's only a 32-bit platform. Most things that use ASLR are using 64-bit, right? So that's a much larger range of memory addresses. When you're, on a phone, when you're limited to a lot less RAM, it's a little different.
I hadn't thought about that. That's interesting.
Since earlier versions of Android, Android's also been using OpenBSD's DLmalloc and CMalloc memory allocators because they have additional security features that prevent, buffer overflows and double freeze and a bunch of different things like that that can cause memory corruption. Android 4.1 also enables some new features in the Linux kernel, dmessage restrict and kptr restrict, that disable unprivileged users from reading the kernel ring buffer, which is your regular dmessage. It's all the hardware information and a lot of security stuff is in there as well. And also a lot of sensitive parts of /proc can now not be read except for by root. So
this is really Google saying we're taking the Android security very seriously, which when you consider all of the extremely confidential information that gets on there after time, especially if you put like the Mint app on there and stuff like that. I mean, these things are definitely the future of malware targeting. Because the value of knowing where I'm at and even being able to turn on the mic and things like that. I mean, can you imagine malware authors not wanting to exploit that?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm very glad Google's doing this. And it sounds like Apple as well. And I'm sure Windows Phone 8 will do this as well. I don't know, but I would hope so.
Now, part of the other thing is, in the report, he talks about how Android hasn't enabled code signing, where Apple has that.
Yeah, for like for executables.
Executables have to be signed by a trusted certificate before they can be run. Now, I'm not sure if requiring that's actually a good thing for Android because, I want to be able to run code not approved by the Google App Store on my Android device, right?
I might be wrong, but I thought they were making it optional. I thought they were making an optional DRM with signing thing that's going to be that they announced at I/O that they're going to introduce with.
Code signing is not DRM. It was just saying this binary hasn't been modified and isn't malicious.
But I believe it's a tandem system. If you use their DRM, it has a code signing component.
Right. I don't know that much about it. I'm not that big into Android. I have an Android device and I love it, but
you actually should be getting Jelly Bean soon because you have the HSDPA Nexus, right?
I think so.
Yeah, you might check for updates, dude. You might already have Jelly Bean.
The update for 4.0 disappeared and I can't get it anymore.
Who cares? Jelly Bean's way better. You're gonna get butter, man. You're getting some butter. All right. Well, should we go to the AMD Catalyst story?
Yes.
All right, so you teased a little bit. What happened?
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago we talked about a cert story that said that if you're using the AMD drivers, you can't use the Microsoft Enhanced Security Toolkit or Advanced Mitigation Toolkit because it'll cause a blue screen. So cert sent a notice about that to AMD in February. And basically, apparently what happened was that the AMD support team got it, but decided since it only happened when you installed this optional software from Microsoft and turned the settings up to high, that it wasn't that big of a deal or it wasn't an AMD problem.
It's not going to affect that many people.
Yeah. But after it started getting some attention when CERT released the advisory publicly, the driver developers
kind of got embarrassed,
and they worked day and night for a couple of days and solved it rather quickly.
Oh, that's awesome!
And sent beta of the drivers to CERT to be tested, and then they're now the official 12.6 release fixes this, so you can use the Microsoft EMET kit, and it won't crash if you have an AMD video card.
Very cool of them. So that's interesting. Support team looked at it and said, we're doing the math on it. They kind of took the bean counter look at it and said, not really worth it to us. And then the devs saw it completely separately. Yeah.
And basically, AMD has a big blog entry here from their driver team talking about how they've reviewed the escalation process and made sure that
Oh, really?
For security related stuff, the developers, not the support team, will get to decide how to prioritize some of those things. But basically, AMD in their driver release said, CERT recently approached AMD with information pertaining to what they believe to be a possible video driver vulnerability exposed by 9 default settings in the Microsoft Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit. The EMET is a security tool that allows system administrators to create test conditions to validate correct behavior of system components or indicate potential weak points, and to prevent exploitation with buffer overflows and so on.
Yeah.
The AMD Catalyst 12.6 drivers for HD 7000, 6000, and 5000 series is designed to resolve a possible video driver vulnerability issue and to minimize the occurrence of system crashes. So you won't get an automatic blue screen using EMET and the AMD drivers together now. So then I have a link to the AMD blog where they go on about, how hard they work on their drivers and so on, and a little bit about how things got so munged up and how they're going to make sure that doesn't happen again. A link to the CERT advisory that talks about it and has, the date they reported it to AMD, when AMD responded, and so on, and an updated blog from CERT about the issue.
It's been an interesting story to kind of watch because you've been tracking this one for a while, actually.
Yeah, and actually someone in the chat room that pointed out the follow-up to it. I didn't know, but basically by the time we reported the story, AMD had just released the new drivers already. We followed up. We didn't follow up. We reiterated the problem when we talked about EMET in response to a different Microsoft vulnerability.
Right.
And anyway, somebody pointed out that there were a new driver out that actually fixes it, so I wanted to make sure we talked about that.
Totally. All right, sir. Should we... Should we go to the next story? And this next story affects a lot of app developers on the Apple platform, potentially. Yep. Although I'm not sure... I'm really on the details. I just saw the headline go by this weekend, but it sounds like maybe a way to work around the in-app purchase functionality of apps on iOS, right?
Right. So some hackers, the news story calls them hackers. I would call them researchers, but they're kind of in the middle there between the two.
I guess.
Released a video demonstrating how by basically using a 3-step process, you could buy things from in-app from stuff in the Apple iTunes store
Yeah.
without actually paying for it.
This is like the new. This is like become like the really new big app revenue model because people can sell their apps for free or 99 cents, and then you just pay for the features in the app you want. And this is how like everybody's making money on iTunes Store
also,
now.
it's the same way that basically Facebook games make their money. They're free to play, but if you want anything in the game, you pay for it with microtransactions.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So this is basically when you use a microtransaction inside the app on your iPhone or iPad or whatever, these guys have a way to exploit it, and so that you don't actually pay, but you get the feature or the functionality or the item or whatever it is.
So they must have done like some sort of. They must have had like some sort of certificate spoofing. How would they accomplish this?
What they did is a 3-step process that doesn't require you to have rooted your device at all, and
really,
basically any user can follow the video and do it. So the 3-step process is to install an additional root CA certificate. Which is just so that the certificate later on in this instructions is trusted.
Is trusted, yeah.
Then you install the certificate for the proxy, which is in-appstore.com. By the researcher or hacker or whatever you want to call him. And then you go into your Wi-Fi settings and change the DNS settings from your regular DHCP or automatic to some specific DNS servers, which will basically...
Their DNS servers?
Yeah. Which will basically do a man-in-the-middle attack, but on purpose, right? The idea is that when the app tries to call Apple to say, hey, this user wants to buy something, please charge them this amount and then give me a receipt, instead of charging them that amount, instead of getting the regular pop-up you get from iTunes saying, are you sure you want to give this guy $1?
Yeah.
It says, don't you love the Russians? And you click yes.
Are you serious?
There's a picture in the link. I forget what the button actually says.
You want to love Apple, don't you? Is what it says, something like that.
Yeah, and then it's got a big button with Russian characters on it.
Love Apple. And the other option is love.
So you click that, and it returns to the app a receipt, making it look like you paid, even though you actually didn't.
Huh.
Now, it seems a lot of iOS applications don't actually bother to do what Apple recommends, which is the app should then take that receipt, call the iTunes API, and check that receipt is legitimate.
Oh, so they had a verification process in there.
Yeah, but a lot of apps didn't implement it.
Well, no.
The problem is the developer of the proxy notes that because of the way he's doing the man-in-the-middle attack, he can spoof that as well, right? He just redirects all traffic that's to the iTunes API.
Right, because the DNS requests are still going to go to his servers.
Right, and he makes the DNS go to his proxy, and then basically he can say every receipt is valid. And see, normally the whole point of SSL is to prevent this DNS spoofing from tricking you into going to the wrong site. But when you purposely install this certificate that says it's the right site anyway...
the root certificate, and I would because I want to bypass this, so it's not like he even has to trick me to do it.
Right. So, basically the SSL is designed to prevent a man-in-the-middle attack against the customer. In this case, the attack is actually against the developer of the
seller.
app.
Yeah, yeah.
So the SSL is not actually providing the security that they're expecting.
Interesting. That's an interesting problem. So I guess really the burden is sort of on app developers to implement this. Well, no, because the verification
still doesn't work. So a developer said, since any attempt to verify the receipt would go through the proxy, it could still be spoofed. So the only way to ensure the receipt is real is to verify it using a third server that's controlled by the developer of the app and that they trust to actually be calling the real iTunes.
So, how does it work if the app needs to download something? I guess it would only... That's really interesting.
The DNS server will return real DNS for everything except for iTunes itself.
Wow. Yeah.
For certain servers or certain requests.
And he just gets to watch it. Everybody gets to query it at that point.
The article I linked actually has a list of the information that the proxy gets about every transaction.
Oh, really? Okay.
If you want to read off the list there, it's beside that big picture.
There's a couple of big pictures here, Alan. Let me see here. There is this infograph. You mean this one?
No, it's a bulleted list of the information that...
I don't see it. Do you see it? I don't see it. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong article.
You probably are.
Yeah, but I like this. I like this. This they have an in-app flowchart that actually explains how it works. So if you guys haven't followed along, there is actually a pretty good flowchart of how when the in-app purchase starts. But yeah,
I'm missing the link that you actually want to look at. But they get the restriction level of the app, the ID number of the app, the version, the GUID of your device, the quantity of in-app purchases, the offer name of the in-app purchase, the language you're using, an identifier of the application, the version of the application, and what language your iPhone uses.
So, and if Apple busted these people, they could sequester that UID list, and then they would know who had been involved in stealing in-app purchases. Because when those people connected back to the App Store, they would be able to match them up.
Well, but the proxy maybe never actually proxied you to the App Store, right? It was to a fake app that returned the right result.
Right, but if he kept a list of people's identifiers, right, and Apple gets that.
Work back. Well, he could destroy it now.
Yeah, hopefully. Do it. I mean, don't do it. Don't steal from these people, you guys. These are like, see, this is the sucky part. Is a lot of these people are just indie devs, and this is now how they're making money, and it's actually kind of a crappy economy. So it's nice that there actually is some kind of.
Well, it's we'll get to it in a second, but it's all Apple's fault anyway.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, that I can live with.
But anyway, part of it is lazy developers not implementing the receipt checking, because by the sounds of it, the proxy doesn't currently trick the receipt checking. So
you didn't really need to.
If the apps did the receipt checking, then they wouldn't be able to get robbed. But the proxy could potentially forge that as well.
Yeah. So
what the iTunes API needs to do, in addition to just depending on TLS or SSL, is actually to sign the receipt checking requests or responses. So when I say, hey, Apple, is this receipt legitimate? When they turn back a result, which is a 0 if it's okay and an error number if it's not, and then a copy of the receipt that I just sent them to check, there should be a signature there, signed with, say, an Apple private key that I would have access to the public key of, and that nobody would be able to spoof. Or I don't know if iTunes. I don't know how iTunes works, but maybe there's a. Well, see, it wouldn't be using SSL. This would be using regular PKI, an out-of-band thing, like just HMAC signing or whatever. The same way that every request to the Scale Engine API or Amazon's API is signed in both directions, and that's to prevent the forgery.
Well,
and it also prevents replay attacks and a bunch of other stuff. In the meantime, developers could do this themselves. So basically, your app, so the way to get around the current problem would just be have your app call your server with the receipt number.
Oh, yeah.
And then your server calls Apple and checks the receipt, since your server won't be spoofed like the physical phone would be, because the user of the physical phone is trying to spoof you. Now, the proxy could start targeting individual apps. Like if, this was set up for Angry Birds, they could decide that, all right, we'll spoof the server for Angry Birds and return the right response for purchases from Angry Birds. So basically for now, since the iTunes API is probably not going to change very soon, developers could basically, instead of calling the iTunes API to check the receipt, they call their own server. Their server calls Apple and checks it. And then when their server returns a response, when the developer's server returns a response to the app, they could sign it with the developer's own key of some kind. And then the app checks that. And as long as the developer doesn't disclose their private key to anybody, then their app can verify that, hey, this message came from the real Angry Birds server, not from a fake Angry Birds server. And if Apple did the same thing, that would work as well.
There you go. Boy, that's an interesting one, Alan, and it sounds like maybe a little extra work on developers' part to protect themselves.
Yeah, and an Apple representative said, the security of the App Store is incredibly important to us and to the developer community. Yeah. We take reports of fraudulent activity very seriously, and we are investigating.
Yeah, of course, of course. All right. Well, any other thoughts on that one?
I just said I forgot one of the links.
Well, while you work on that, I want to give a special mention to our friends over at GoDaddy.com who are sponsoring this week's episode of TechSNAP. And I want to say thank you to Nick, who wrote into the show, and he said, how come you guys never talk about GoDaddy's awesome virtual servers? And you know, that is on my list of shame because this is actually a very cool thing that I looked into. So if you're familiar with Amazon's offering or Rackspace's offering, and that has piqued your interest, something where you can go load a virtual machine, you can put something on demand that you want, maybe have a project, you want to have a complete system. This is so cool. Alan, I've been playing around with GoDaddy's new hosting control panel, and I'm actually just going to do it here live on the show. This, first of all, they have this very well done management interface where you can add virtual machines. And it's very cool because you just add a machine, and right now it's on-demand pricing, and they make it very clear how much you're spending. And it's not like on Amazon where a $200 charge snuck up on me. They have little usage bars right here on your main dashboard that tell you exactly how much you've been charged at this very moment. They'll give you graphs and stats. But what I love is if you want to, remember we had somebody that emailed in and said, I'm trying to come up with this crazy way to do load balancing, right? Mm-hmm. This GoDaddy dashboard is you add a machine and you choose what kind of machine you want to add. So I'll say let's say this is the Jupyter box, right?
Yep.
And I say make this, and they have this really nice graphical animation. So I'll give this 2 gigs of memory, and it's going to have 4 virtual CPUs, and I can see it's going to cost me 8 cents an hour to run that if it's at moderate capacity there. And then I hit next, and I go through and I configure all these things. And I can just keep adding machines like this, and then after that, it's a one-button click to add a load balancer, a network load balancer that sits in front of these virtual machines and distributes out the traffic amongst your applications. Nice. So when we had somebody that was writing in trying to come up with this crazy solution to do load balancing, it's literally one button, and then you distribute the load amongst all of your virtual machines. And if you need to go in there and turn up capacity, you could do it. And you can do on-demand pricing, so you don't have to pay a minimum rate. Right now I'm paying $0 and 0 cents a month until I go in there and I just turn a machine on, and I only get charged for what I use. And their rates are lower than Amazon or Rackspace. And the better thing is we have a code. You can save 25% off of their virtual server hosting if you use our code TechSNAP25. TechSNAP25. I've never talked about this service. This is called GoDaddy Cloud Hosting. And it's...
Well, because they have a virtual data center thing too, which is the same idea, but it's like a private cloud, isn't it?
It's kind of combined in with this now into this product here. And they've taken where you have your virtual data center and the management dashboard where you have all your servers laid out and you get to see your network layout and all that kind of stuff. And now they're adding it in there with the types of things like load balancing and things like that so it can scale on demand like that. This, I think, is GoDaddy's runaway hit product. I think this is their big product because if you compare it to some of the other big guys, they really do have them beat, and it's such a slick interface to do it. Plus, you can do Windows, Ubuntu, Fedora, CentOS, whatever you want.
Yep. And, we've talked a bit about the amount of infrastructure that GoDaddy has, like the number of data centers and so on. And they're probably almost in a better position than Amazon to have this kind of scale.
So there you go. We've never really talked about it before. If you want to check that out, it's GoDaddy Cloud Servers, and you can use our code TechSNAP25 to save 25% when you check it out. Or just use one of the other codes we have in our show notes. We have good deals on .coms and some other maybe .xxx domains, things like that over at the show notes. But and thank you, GoDaddy, for sponsoring this week's episode of TechSNAP. All right, Alan, with all of that done, it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or using the Contact Us form, or, like this week's first question, Alan, it was submitted over at links.techsnap.tv, the show's subreddit. Are you ready for the first question, Alan? Okay. Yeah, sure. He's like, yeah, I guess so. So this one comes from, I'm going to say Max Bovin. I think that's how you'll say it. And he's got an interesting question, and I don't know. We'll see what we can come up with for him, Alan. He says, hello, guys. This is a bit off topic, but he has a beautiful dream and one that I can sort of identify with. He says, I'm considering living on a boat and traveling around, but there is one big problem. You may have guessed it, accessing the internet. I don't need internet solely. I don't need the internet solely for my entertainment, like listening to Jupiter Broadcasting, but also for work. He needs to make a living, unfortunately. A lot of marinas now offer Wi-Fi when you're close to the coast, and you can sometimes access the cellular network. And if you're on the high sea, you can spend a lot of money on a crappy satellite connection. Of course, all those options are on the sucky side. So what I was wondering is, would it currently be technologically possible to offer a better service for a better price. I know this would take a lot of money, but I think there's an untapped market here. Not only a lonely sailor wanting to access porn, but also a massive cruise or ship or cargo ship. Maybe a transatlantic plane could benefit as well. He goes on to kind of give a couple of different great reasons and how you could do it for a good price, although he doesn't really have any suggestions. But I would like a few ideas. Now, I had one thing that kind of struck me out. And at first my reaction was like, well, when you're way out there and, satellite might not be, it might not be a great option. I know.
And
he
the problem
didn't like
with satellite is you only have so much bandwidth going down, and that bandwidth is basically shared by every single person using it. Like with a regular cable system, it's a shared media, but the shared media is only like per segment. So, you're like sharing with people on your block maybe in total.
Right.
But with the satellite, you're basically sharing with every single person using that satellite.
Now, the one thing that struck me is it might not be impossible because Google, remember Google had their Google Glasses stunt? Maybe it doesn't have to use satellite. They didn't use satellite to supply the glasses with internet for their hangout while they were falling from a plane. They used a combination of a Nexus S in Wi-Fi repeater mode, and then they cut a hole at the bottom of a wok, like for frying food. And they pointed it up at the guys that were falling. And then they had a backup crew that were using lasers. And they were pointing lasers at these backpacks. Maybe that's how we could do it.
Right. That works great for a temporary stunt, but it doesn't really work for,
hack the fiber on the seafloor. I don't know if we actually have a good answer for him, but if you folks out there
basically, satellite is the only option, and it's very expensive, and the latency is really bad as well.
Yes.
Because especially if you're going to do both directions via satellite, some original satellite systems that people had just, fixed satellites for their home to get broadband speeds still used dial-up to send the upstream. And basically everything went through an HTTP proxy, and you would send the request for the website you want to go to the base station. Then the base station would fetch the website and then stream it to you over to the satellite. And so there was this huge latency because you had to use, dial-up has high latency in and of itself. Then you have to send that to the base station, and then the base station sends it up to the satellite. Or the base station has to go up to the internet, get it back, and then send it up to the satellite and push it down. And
Nightmare.
So the satellite systems actually came up with this idea of actually fake ACKs. So basically fake acknowledgements as part of the TCP stream to try to make up for the latency, and it caused all kinds of weirdness.
Well,
then they got low orbit satellites that were a little more reasonable for people to actually be able to do two-way via the satellite, but the bandwidth is really bad. A lot of them, they offer really high speeds, but you're limited to like 500 megabytes a day of traffic.
If anybody else has some suggestions, we'll have a link to the subreddit thread, and you could always toss a comment in there, and maybe you never know.
Sharks with friggin' laser beams.
There you go. Yeah, just equip the sharks. All right, Alan. Well, the next feedback comes from another subreddit submission, Chokomoko. We've actually gotten feedback from him before, I believe. But here it is, Alan. Are you ready for this? He wants to know, can you use a USB Ethernet adapter with Pfsense? And I wanted to keep the Pfsense theme going. We've had a Pfsense question in every show for a few weeks in a row now. I wanted to keep that streak. He says, I have an Atom board that uses 12 watts with a gigabit Ethernet port, and I want to use it for Pfsense, but I also want a WAN port. I have a 20 megabit WAN, so I was thinking a normal 10100 USB Ethernet adapter would be fine.
I don't know if there are specific ones that'll work better, or would if a driver's required. But basically, you could look around and find ones that are specifically supported. Festive
Mongoose chimed in the Reddit. This is a great reason to submit these via the subreddit. He says, I use a USB Ethernet adapter for WAN port on my Pfsense box. It's actually a VM. And he got a D-Link Dub E100, 10100 USB to Ethernet adapter, and he said it is rock solid. It's never gone down. It's been running like this for over a year. You don't need gigabit for most WAN speeds. Also, this thing works perfect in Linux. I didn't even have to install any drivers for it. So he's actually got the model number of the one he used in the subreddit, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes.
And basically, that's your best bet, is to find basically a consensus of, this USB stick is used with Pfsense by 2 other people, and it works for them, so I should get that one.
I will put here it's on Amazon for $21, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes with the affiliate link. So if you want to support the show, you can use that link and get yourself a USB adapter and support TechSNAP while you're doing it. Now that's really geeky.
I'll have to try the one I have. I have a USB. Well, I guess it's wireless, so it's probably less likely to work. But I have one laying around the house somewhere here.
Yeah, the wireless might be a little more tricky, but I wonder if you had that, could you then turn you could turn your Pfsense into an access point?
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Cheat. I have a regular wireless router that you know, like an off-the-shelf one, with all of the router functions disabled and using it just as an AP and as a switch, and it's just connected to the Pfsense box, which does the NAT and the DHCP and all that.
Well, yeah, that works, too. That works.
Yep.
All right. Well, Mike writes in. He says, "Hi, guys. I came across your show last week by accident." Boy, how awesome is that? Yes. I've been watching loads of shows since then. Great job. Love it. I'm a total newbie regarding Linux and FreeBSD, etc., but I have a couple of quick questions. Now, prepare yourself for this one, Alan. I think we might just kind of go with whatever we kind of have to share on this one. I want to set up a file server on my home network, and I have Windows 7 machines, and I have around 12... I guess he means terabytes. He has 12 terabytes on it with external SATA drives. That's quite a bit on external SATA drives. I want something relatively simple. It'll be serving videos and MP3 files mainly. And he says he's watched a couple of our early episodes regarding FreeNAS and services, but it seemed way too much, or maybe even overkill, for what he really wanted. I'd like something simple that works as a main media hub for my house or network. I think you mentioned that I could use an old PC, and I have a few old Pentium 4s or Athlon machines, or I could use my main Windows PC. It's 8 gigs with a quad core. He goes on to kind of list some of the specs. He says, I always seem to be copying and moving things around from drive to drive at the moment, so FreeNAS on the network centralized sounds really nice. The only thing is I don't know anything about Linux. I know it runs my web server, but I'm learning loads by watching your show. One more quick question. All the hacks you go over on the show. This might be a good show topic, Alan, so maybe we'll just save this for the future. How do these guys cover their tracks when they hack a server? You read something once, and you hear these groups had said this or said that, but how do they actually get away with it? I understand they probably use a proxy or something like that, but I'd love to know how they remain anonymous. Maybe that'd be a future show topic. Yeah. So I'd say let's answer his question is he wants to simplify his storage on his network. He's got a ton of storage, but it's all over the place. Sounds like he's kind of leaning FreeNAS.
Well, the first thing, he talked about using an old machine, but if he has a bunch of these external drives via eSATA, the older machine's not going to have eSATA ports. And so how are you going to connect those storage to them?
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's going to be limiting.
And if you're just storing the files, like, are you playing them individually on a bunch of different machines? Then, then all you really want is a file server, and you can do that with anything. You could use Windows if that's what's already on there and most what you're more comfortable with. Otherwise, Ubuntu server or whatever, as setting up Samba's pretty easy.
I almost would kind of go like the route, because since it sounds like he already has the drives, so he wouldn't have to be buying the drives, then sometimes like these pre-built Ready NASs are a cheaper route to go, because you just get the chassis and load it up with the drives you already have. Like this Ready NAS Ultra 2 network attached storage, $262. You fill that thing up with drives. It does media streaming. It'll index all of your stuff. I've also had a good recommendation from a friend for the LG versions of their storage. They have a Drobo-like Beyond RAID that they call it. They call it the same thing Drobo calls it, where you put any size drives in there, they can be mismatched and they'll still be redundant. And it, again, does media streaming to basically any TV that does DNLA or set top to box. You buy one of these things, you set it up, it becomes an appliance, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Yep. And, you can do the same thing with an old PC and FreeNAS, although you probably want a newer PC if you want to be using very large drives and so on. And then dedicating a whole PC to FreeNAS seems like overkill at that point.
And the chat room's also recommending Synology, which I've never had a Synology, but I've heard people love those.
The other thing is, when he calls it a central media hub, it's like if this is the machine that's going to be connected to a TV or something, then you might want to consider something like XBMC, which you can run on Windows, Linux, or FreeBSD.
Yes, definitely. Here's the one I think the chat room recommends, because I've seen people talking about this one, the Synology Disk Station 4-Bay. So no disk. It's $360 out of the box, but it is a very simple, straightforward solution. All you got to worry about is just putting the drives in there. It's got lights on the front that tell you what's going on, and it'll show up on your network as a media server, so you could put anything on your TV to watch it. This, I really think, would be the way to go for him. And then later on, he could play under the hood and start learning the Linux that runs these things.
But, Ubuntu on a machine and setting up Samba is pretty straightforward as well.
Yeah, and that would be a good learning experience.
Yeah. Don't you actually, guess it'd be about a month ago now, I reinstalled the FreeBSD on the machine that is my home router.
Yeah.
Upgraded it to 9 and moved all of my files over to ZFS. So I'm actually using ZFS with a bunch of mismatched size drives.
Very nice. It
was interesting to see how ZFS managed the free space.
Oh, yeah.
On all the other arrays I've built with ZFS in the past, all the drives have been the same size, and I've started with all the drives empty. So it writes the same amount of data to each drive, right? So they fill up at the same speed.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the way I built this array, where I was basically converting a bunch of the disks from the regular UFS to ZFS.
Oh, yeah.
What I did was I started with the brand new drive, the drive I was adding to the machine that was empty, and created it as the first part of a ZFS, right? Because by default with ZFS, if you don't set up the RAID or anything, you just add a bunch of disks together and they work as one array. And it's, there's no redundancy or anything, but it's just kind of like a JBOD, but different. More importantly than what you get over JBOD is the ability to use the replace command to swap out a drive.
I had my first ZFS experience. I talked about it on this last Sunday's Linux Action Show. I played with a distro that comes with ZFS support, and you know what I did? Right. Made a new partition, and I installed Diablo 3 on it. Got Diablo 3 working under Wine, running off a ZFS partition. It was pretty cool. One quick more thing about the Synology. First of all, the reviews on Amazon are crazy. JBViewer9 in the chat room mentions that you get Linux terminal access on the Synology NAS.
You would get that with FreeNAS as well, but yeah.
I
nice
want
for an embedded
this.
device.
I think because I'm trying to figure out what the F I'm going to do,
right?
And I need something small and quiet. $360 and you get Linux terminal access. That's really sweet. I kind of.
But
like
yeah,
that.
so with my array, I added the first new drive and then started moving files off the other drive, one of the smallest drive first, and then once the smaller drive was empty, I reformatted it and added it to the ZFS array. So now when I start writing, it's writing to both disks, but it's doing a bias where like 2/3 of the data is going to the bigger disk and 1/3 to the smaller disk.
That's awesome.
And then I kept doing this until I had moved all my disks over. And then I actually, it's a feature of ZFS that never got finished. There was this idea of being able to rebalance it and level it out more. But there was something that got abandoned when Oracle bought Sun. But anyway, I moved a couple of files off and then back on, and it rebalanced it a bit more so that the one drive wasn't full.
Nice.
And so that now the write speed stays up because it's writing to all the disks at once. And it just happens that my disks that are bigger and therefore have more free space are faster because they have a higher data density. So writing a higher portion of the data to them instead of evenly is actually making the entire write speed faster at the same time. Yes, IllumiOS is still working on ZFS, and if you watched the ZFS video I linked last week in the roundup, it talks about that project committing their code back to IllumiOS and to FreeBSD.
All right, next question, Alan, comes from Alexander, and he asks, I set up a PPTP VPN using Pfsense. Look at that. I want to be able to access my desktop using the VPN to SSH and access web services. How do I do this? So I think the question sounds a little confused because if he already has a PPT VPN to his house, he should be able to get to the machines on his LAN. So then it would just be SSH.
I think what he's asking to do is he is somewhere else.
Yeah.
He wants to VPN into his house
and then go out from the net
as his default route and then get out to the net.
Maybe to bypass a filter.
Yeah, well, if your house is in the USA and you're traveling somewhere and you want Netflix, then you need to make it look like you're in the USA.
Yeah.
So then it's just a matter of the routes. I've not done this with Pfsense before, but I've done this with raw BSD, which is all Pfsense really is a web interface on top of it. So it's possible. It's just a matter of making your default route on the client computer be the VPN, and then on the VPN end, you have to make sure the VPN has access to the internet, not just to the internal LAN. And I think it's just a matter of some settings in Pfsense.
And then on the client machine, your default route should be the VPN.
Yeah, and then as long as the VPN has a route to the internet on the Pfsense machine, then you should be good.
Yeah.
Using SSH is okay, but it's more for a single service, you want this port on this machine to go to there. It's not really
necessary
for accessing something like Netflix where it's going to be a bunch of different ports that you're not going to be able to predict.
It's sometimes what I do is I'll just avoid the VPN and I'll just SSH into my home machine and then do X11 porting and just start Firefox that way. And then I'm essentially browsing from my home machine, and then I don't have to worry about routes or VPN tunnels or anything like that. I just need to be able to do that. And that's not a bad way to go either.
Interesting story. I played Star Wars: The Old Republic, and they had a bit of a routing issue, probably specific to my ISP last week.
Oh, no.
Where currently and previously, the way my route worked was it would go from my house to my ISP, from there to Toronto, to New York, to Virginia, to the server in Washington, D.C.
That's not too bad. That's not too bad.
That's perfectly normal. But then all of a sudden, I noticed one day I logged in and my ping, instead of 60, was 160.
Did you have like the bad bars on their little UI that show you have bad connection?
I had like 2 bars instead of 4.
Yeah.
And my ping was 160 instead of 60. So I did a trace route. My route was from me to my ISP to Toronto to Winnipeg, Edmonton, San Jose, Los Angeles, Houston, Texas, Washington, D.C. to Virginia, back to Washington, D.C. to the server.
What was going on?
Literally, instead of going, Toronto, New York, Virginia, Washington, D.C., right? It went all the other way and circumnavigated the entire United States, right? It went to Winnipeg, over to Edmonton, which is almost on the West Coast, and then to San Jose, which is on the West Coast, to Los Angeles, which is about as far from where I live, and it's entirely the wrong direction.
Not ideal for the MMO gameplay.
No, and so basically my latency was almost 3 times normal, and it was quite ridiculous. And so to get around this, I decided to use a VPN. No, this started before the explosion. They can't blame the explosion.
He's talking to the chat room. See, some people don't even know. They think you're just talking to ghosts.
My dad in the chat room says, I think I had an explosion at Shaw. I'm like,
he missed the first part of the show, I think.
Yes. But anyway, to get around this, I decided I would just VPN tunnel to my servers in Toronto at Pier 1 and connect via there. And so I set up OpenVPN and set it up, and I routed only the subnet for the Tor servers over the VPN. And because of that, I actually ended up, my ping was actually less than it normally was.
Oh, really?
Because my ISP's route to Pier 1 is very good, and then Pier 1's route to everywhere is very good.
Yeah.
So basically I ended up with a route that was only 50 milliseconds instead of 60.
All right, Alan, it's time for our last question. It comes from Robert, and he writes, this is more of a request than a question, so it's not actually something we're going to answer today, but maybe something we can consider. Would it be possible to cover in the show or a series of shows the principles of networking, i.e. what IP addresses are, internal and external, how to find yours, your internal and your external, what a net mask and a gateway is, how to port forward ports, something that is targeted towards beginners who wish to get into networking. If this is not possible, could you direct me to some sites that would be targeted for beginners? Keep up the great work. Love watching TechSNAP and laughs.
Yes. Now, this is something I've talked about doing before. Is I would love to do a version of my how to do IP subnetting and what it is and how it works thing. It's just a matter of finding enough time to do so.
And like kind of figuring out how to break it down into a format that works over a couple of episodes. But kind of like the basic information's there.
And get all my diagrams. It's like when I taught this, I usually had a whiteboard and I could just kind of make it up on the fly.
Dude, you could totally have a whiteboard behind you. That'd be so funny.
Yeah,
It'd be really. We could always do like, there's a lot of shared whiteboards, like Google has some.
Right. No, but I could just make a diagram. I would have to spend a bunch of time doing that. Yeah. So yes, I would love to do that.
Something we'll keep on the list one of these days. Yeah.
Basically it would start off with what is an IP address, how does it work, and then what's a subnet mask, and how do you tell if 2 IPs are in the same subnet, and how do you build a subnet, and all the important stuff.
Yeah. So there you have it. All right.
Yes, the layers of the Osi model, because that the whole concept of an envelope in an envelope is quite interesting.
And I think like the chat room, I see P.O. Bear in the chat rooms recommending Khan Academy. I know there's like some iTunes use stuff you can go check out for free. There's some podcasts out there that cover the basics. I would probably actually go that route. But yeah. All right, Alan. Well, that's all of the...
Basically, the plan at one point was to just do a bunch of one-off episodes that would just be released when they were done, kind of thing.
But that takes time away from doing the actual show.
Yeah, and it's hard enough to find enough time to do the actual show.
Yep. All right. Well, that's all the emails we got this week. So if you want to send in, or I might reply to you directly, you can email us techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or use that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website. But with all of that done, Alan, it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite make it to the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them, maybe give you a link to go check it out and do a little further reading on your own. And most of these links were provided by the TechSNAP subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And thank you everyone who votes over there and comments on stories. It helps us gauge what you want to see in the show. All right, Alan, our first Roundup story goes to me. And I thought this one was interesting for two reasons. First of all, shame on this FBI agent. And second of all, it's still blowing my mind to see big news stories broken via Twitter. Yep. So instead of linking to Twitter, I just linked to the TechSNAP subreddit because I'm not ready to handle that yet. I'm not going to start linking to Twitter tweets. That's just ridiculous. He says, so anyways, the tweet basically said, it was discovered that a FBI agent specializing in homeland security and counterterrorism actually used the password, only it was with a capital A and dollar signs and a 0 instead of an O. Password 1. And of course, surprise, surprise, somebody guessed that and got access to his accounts. And then there was an ensuing conversation in the subreddit, which was
the first question is,
funny.
Is this his personal email? Because anything that's, professional or job-oriented should be going through, an FBI.gov email address.
No, yeah,
this
is his Yahoo. This is his Yahoo.
Yeah,
and I guess there were some embarrassing things in there. I don't know if there's anything confidential.
Leet speak in your password, maybe that's okay. But how about choosing a base password other than the word password?
Yeah, just stay away from password, especially when you're the Homeland Security counterterrorism agent.
Yeah, also
specializing in that.
There should be 2 S's in password.
Yeah. All right, Alan. The next Roundup story goes to you, sir. Take it away.
Yeah. So an Australian consumer group is demanding an investigation into GeoIP-based price gouging. Basically, they found that certain websites advertise a higher price if they detect your IP is in Australia. So if you browse from somewhere else, the price is actually lower. On top of the fact that lots of things are blocked if you're in those countries. I know. As a Canadian, sometimes, somebody links me to a YouTube video or whatever, and it says you can't watch this because we don't have rights to show it in your country.
Region restrictions on the internet is the most ludicrous thing. I mean, like your example of the trace route going all the way around the United States is just a perfect example as to why the internet doesn't give a crap about physical boundaries. It doesn't,
Exactly.
So yeah, this I don't really have much to say other than I think this should get more attention because I would be pissed if I went somewhere and got upcharged because I came from the US.
But even buying physical goods in Australia, like movies and video games, basically cost 50% more if you're in Australia for no reason.
You're kidding me.
Yep, and because especially there, DVDs have the region restriction, and so you can't buy American DVDs and just play them in Australia.
Right.
Your DVD player is locked to Australian region code.
So stupid.
And basically, the same movie costs 50% more because it has a different region code on it.
Maybe we should do an episode looking at reasonable proxy methods. All right, Alan, the next story in the roundup is a Dropbox story, and at this point, it's nothing to worry about, but it's something to keep an eye on. Dropbox has hired outside experts to investigate some sort of possible email breach. It kind of started off like this, is Dropbox started getting a lot of users complaining for a couple of days that they were getting spam delivered to email accounts that they had only created and only used for their Dropbox account. And they say it's happening to enough users, this is Dropbox, that they're investigating the matter with an internal security team, but the company has also decided to bring an outside experts in to determine if there's a breach, because they say the outside team, they want to leave no stone unturned. Yep. We haven't had any reports of unauthorized activity on Dropbox accounts. We've taken a number of precautionary steps to continue to work around, and we continue to work around the clock to make sure your information is safe. We'll continue to provide updates.
And this actually ties back into the previous question about how do people cover up the evidence of their attack. It's like sometimes it's how do we even know if we've been attacked?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And
and it's a good question that maybe we can try to answer next week.
Okay,
a little bit about it.
I think this is just Dropbox being good guy Dropbox trying to make sure that they're not letting some sort of breach go unturned because they know that
it appears they're trying to get out ahead of it.
Yeah,
because it does.
Yeah,
based on this evidence, it would appear that there was a breach. If I know that I have a domain that I own that I use as a catch-all, basically every possible email address goes to me,
funnels,
no matter what it. Right, and so I use a unique one for each site that I sign up for.
Yeah,
so that if one of them starts sending me spam, I can block that individual site.
Right.
or just categorize where it came from. And, I see this type of thing happen sometimes when if I start getting a bunch of phishing emails to a specific address, I know there was probably a security problem at that side.
Well, let's talk about the next story on the roundup is yours, and it sounds like a bug that might result in us having a surprise guest host on a future edition of TechSNAP, right?
But apparently there's a bug currently in Skype where some of your private messages, your instant messages, may actually go to a random person on your contact list rather than the intended person.
Okay, so it's just the instant message.
Now, we've heard a few rumors of this happening with video, but if an instant message can go to the wrong person, a call technically possibly could.
That would just be the funny. That would be the funny end result. There was a gag story in the subreddit that implied maybe a dirty call got sent, but it was just a joke.
Right.
All right.
But I use Skype to discuss business a lot, and having that go to random people wouldn't be a good thing.
Oh yeah, definitely. Now, Alan, of course, the big Batman movie is about to premiere this week, and so the internet is never one to fail to capitalize on an exciting moment. So we're introducing the Hello Kitty signal. It's the Internet Defense Signal, and they're called themselves the Internet Defense League, and they've assembled to fight the copyright lobby, and they're actually coming up with a cat signal, kind of like the bat signal, that will shine in the sky a cat's face, as a way to remind everyone about the horrors of things like SOPA and ACTA, to try to keep everyone vigilant. They'll be shining the face of a cat, because the internet apparently loves cats.
Right.
The Internet Defense League, bringing balance to the battle over internet freedom and copyright. So I think that's an interesting thing.
I don't have the link in the roundup, but there's also an interesting story. The Supreme Court of Canada's recent ruling on copyrights that we talked a little bit about. Also, when people finished reading more of the decision, there's a clause in there that basically enforces net neutrality as part of copyright law. Specifically saying that companies can't charge you more just because you want it over the internet instead of on a CD or DVD.
Excellent.
And that basically it was putting down the idea that ISPs could charge a surcharge for delivering music. Right?
That's awesome.
If you buy the music from somewhere, you shouldn't have to pay extra for your ISP to deliver it to you.
Yeah. Yes. Amen. All right. Last story on the roundup was sent in by my co-host on SciByte, Heather. She emailed this to us today, and I don't know if you caught this. I think she CC'd you too.
Yep.
YouTube launches face blurring tool to keep protesters anonymous.
Yes.
So you upload the video, and then post-upload, it'll do the blurring.
Yes, you can blur people's faces out so that, actually, I think when they had the riots in Calgary, Vancouver, I don't remember where it was. Yes, Calgary. After the an NHL game, they used a lot of videos they posted to YouTube to try to track down people who were, where there's video evidence of them committing a crime. How
likely, though, do you think it is that Google isn't storing the original version of the video somewhere that they could just be subpoenaed for?
Right, but if they're legally subpoenaed, that's one thing. If it's a country where the government is going to summarily execute you, that maybe is different. And
I guess, the subpoena process is actually a process where if your face is just on the internet, they could just, they don't have to do anything. Right. They just can go look and find you. So it at least adds a layer of protection.
Right. Is, with the subpoena, a judge has to agree with the government's evidence first. There's at least some checks and balances on the process.
Well, one last little story, Alan, just to smile at as we round up the roundup. And we used to always have, early days in the show, we'd have the Bitcoin blaster after the roundup, but that kind of went away. Just for old time's sake, I thought we'd slip a Bitcoin story in here, just because I know we still had some people interested in the audience. Bitcoin soars above $9 for the first time in almost a year. Bitcoin's back, baby! Everybody go! It's a gold rush!
I still have some Bitcoins.
I do too. I have I don't know what they're worth now, but yeah, I have like a handful of Bitcoins.
$9. So.
Yeah. Well, good for Bitcoin. There you go. Now, if you just can't get yourself enough Jupiter Broadcasting, you might not even be familiar, especially if you're kind of new. I'll say in the last 3 years to the network. I used to have a show called Radio Revolver. And this was a show that featured the really best in classic radio, like the golden age before TV was big, from like the 40s and 30s. And I decided just to re-roll that this weekend on the Jupiter Radio project that we're starting over at jblive.info. And if you've never heard it, it's an old show I did, and it's everything from like The Shadow to Batman, Superman, X-1, space adventures, old western, dragnet cop dramas, all kinds of really great old-time radio. It'll be streaming Friday, the 20th, July 20th, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, all the way till 2200, and then that'll be the first half of Radio Revolver, and then starting on Saturday at 1300 till 2200, it'll be the second block of Radio Revolver. If you've never heard Radio Revolver, it's not available for download anywhere. It'll only be streamed over at jblive.info. And we're also on Saturday going to be playing some classic Linux action show from like the first 20 episodes of the show. Stuff that is also pretty hard to get your hands on. So go check that out over at jblive.info. Alan,
yep.
I think that's the whole show.
That is.
That's it right there. All right, folks. If you'd like to join Alan and I live so that way you can sometimes distract Alan during the show and get him to go off on a tangent, you could do that at 1 p.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv or jblive.info for the audio. 1 p.m. Pacific is what?
4 p.m. Eastern or 2000 UTC.
There you go. And we love it when you can join us live. If not, the show is usually out for download a few hours after that, and you can get it in mobile video versions, high-definition video versions, audio only, whatever you'd like. You'll find it over Jupiter Broadcasting, as well as Alan's awesome show notes that are packed full of links. And I'll include links to some of the things we talked about on Amazon today, because if you want to grab one of those, you can help support the show. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.